Okay, so I believe we're live, Vladimir.
All right.
So let's start this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You wanna start the conversation by reciting a poem
Yeah,
today?
yeah. This poem.
So I'm excited to listen to this poem.
Yeah, I actually want to say first that I like doing this. I'm trying to master a new habit, like to learn a poem every week. And this week it was the poem from Devil's Dictionary. Now, have you heard about Devil's Dictionary? Devil's Dictionary.
No, I don't think so.
It's
I don't think so. I don't
it's
think I don't think I
so
have.
so so it's kind of satirical book which was published in 1906 by American writer Ambrose Bierce, and so there are some uh, funny definitions of like basically of everything. And I'm trying to read this dictionary like 5-10 minutes, 5-10 minutes a day, just to kind of mental gymnastics. So the poem is called Abracadabra.
Okay,
Yeah,
sounds exciting.
and it's also a definition of this word abracadabra. So by abracadabra we signify an infinite number of things. It is the answer to what and how and why and whence and whither, a word whereby the truth, with the comfort it brings, is open to all who grope in night, crying for wisdom's holy light. Whether the word is a verb or a noun is knowledge beyond my reach. I only know it's handed down from sage to sage, from age to age, an immortal part of speech. Of an ancient man, the tale is told that he lived to be 10 centuries old, in a cave on a mountain side. True, he finally died. The fame of his wisdom filled the land, for his head was bald, and you understand that his beard was long and white, and his eyes uncommonly bright. Philosophers gathered from far and near to sit at his feet and hear, though he never was heard to utter a word, but abracadabra, abracadab, abracada, abracat, abraca, abrac, abra, up. 'Twas all he had, 'twas all they wanted to hear, and each made made copious notes of mystical speech, which they published next, a trickle of text in the middle of commentary. Mighty big books were these, in number as leaves of trees, in learning, remarkable very. He is dead, as I said, and the books of the sages have perished, but his wisdom is sacredly cherished. In abracadabra, it solemnly rings as an ancient bell that forever swings. Oh, I love to hear that word make clear humanity's general state of things. That's all.
That's all.
yeah,
Okay, that
yeah.
that was
Like,
good. Wow, that's a long poem. I'm impressed. So you're memorizing one of these every week?
yeah, once a week, and basically, I doesn't make a lot. Like, it takes me just 15 minutes, 15-20 minutes to memorize a poem. But
Really? Wow.
then I repeat it every morning. Like again, kind of brain gymnastics. I do it 5-10 minutes, 5-10 minutes dedicate for repetition, and at the end of the week, I read it at the speaking club. So, and I guess like if I like it, I may read it here as well, just to you know.
Wow, that's really impressive. Maybe I should start trying to do that because I think my memory is terrible. So maybe that would be a
well,
good exercise for me.
I've been doing it since 2013. So the first time when I started working on it, like memorizing poetry, and basically it was in Russian. And at that time, I also was like writing poetry by myself. And the whole idea was again training memory. I heard from some kind of motivational speaker that just dedicating 5-10 minutes every day to memorize something is a good exercise. So if you do it consistently, you'll have lots of fun and it's going to be productive. And I started doing that, and in a few months I increased the amount of time to 30 minutes. So every day, like 30 minutes, no matter what, I'll just memorize something. It may be a poem, it may be some piece of text, and after a few months I had so much like to, and I tried to, I tried to keep it all in mind for all, like not forget anything. And after a few months, I had so much, like in long term memory, I had stuff for a few hours to repeat. Just every like once a week, I I tried to maintain a schedule to repeat
Yeah.
it, like, memorize something, you repeat it for 5 days, then you repeat it once a week, and after a few months you repeat it just once a month. And at the end of second month I already had like few hours of repeating stuff, like to remember all poems. But then, like, I maintained it for half a year. It was beginning of 2013, and it was actually the year when I started like first studying language. I mean, just try to find some. I was watching TED Talks and try to translate them. It was kind of exciting experience for me, and I also wanted to memorize Shakespeare. And I remember the first, like in Russian, it took me just 10 minutes to memorize a piece of like one poem, 16, 20 lines. But Shakespeare, this To Be or Not to Be, Hamlet's monologue, it took me, I guess, few weeks. Just I couldn't memorize I couldn't memorize more than 2 lines in a day. But then gradually again, I build. So it's so different with different languages. I mean, when you use language all the time, and when you understand it, it looks as if you may just memorize it fast and keep it for a long time. But if it's a new language, if you don't use it, if you don't use these words, if you don't know these words, if you don't have, some big web or like mental web which you may apply for, for these words, it's so hard. I mean, even 2 lines, just 8 words, it's very hard to keep them in mind if you don't use them regularly.
Yeah, no, I bet. I like the stuff that we were talking before. I like this idea of the stream of consciousness on talking to yourself, the self-talk. So how does that work exactly, the self-talk method? Was that something that you developed to learn the language?
Oh no, I started exactly the same time, 2013, like beginning. It was the first time when I recorded myself. It was February 2013, and basically there's no rules. You just put a camera and talk to the camera for 10-15 minutes, or maybe you may choose any time you have. You may do it for half an hour, for an hour.
And in your case, you were doing that in English because you're learning English. Is that or did you start in Russian?
Yeah, I started in Russian, and after 4 years, like practicing it, I applied it for studying English, and again, I had a great success in terms of being like learning it fast, learning to understand. First, it wasn't there. I didn't have a purpose to learn to speak. So first, I needed to understand just what I was watching on on YouTube, on the internet, and it helped me just to.
Is this when you started the YouTube channel in 2013?
No, it was
or so.
2017 YouTube channel, 2017. I stored my Russian self-talks on computer and never published them before I started studying English.
Okay, so you started to publish talks.
Yeah, and before it was basically a writing journal. I mean, like the whole idea with self-talk, it's basically like a video journal, just an attempt to do something different. Because when you just write, something on paper, it's a different, like, again, the same idea, stream of consciousness, but it's a different stream of consciousness. In half an hour, you produce just 1 page, but if you talk for half an hour, it's like 20 pages or 15 pages.
It's a lot.
Yeah, there are lots of garbage here, but it's
just improvising. It's just improvising, so of course, it will be disjointed, but yeah,
it kind of expands your mental horizons, and like this brainstorming, it always in my case, it's always gives me a new ways of understanding something. Like, even if I talk about the same thing, I had this experience when I started conducting the club, and I needed to
Russia, right?
Yeah, I created the course of, like, not the course, it was just 1 lecture, but to prepare for that lecture, like, I needed to learn like something related to motivation. And I remember for the whole month, I just recorded self-talks uh, talking about motivation. I always started, okay, I need to talk about motivation and become an expert in motivation. And no matter, like, I'm trying to focus on this topic and talk about it for 10 minutes every day. And no, if I repeat myself every time, it doesn't matter. Just 10 minutes, I talk, then I go on the internet, read something, and every day I add something new. So in a month, I kind of I became like so overwhelmed with this idea of motivation. I watched like hundreds of videos, short videos, small, like 5-10 minutes, about motivation. Not about motivation, but motivational videos when you hear somebody talking like, you must do it like every day for 5 minutes, uh, just do it, take action, and all this vocabulary. But yeah, it was effective in terms of understanding. It's like it seems as if you may take any topic, and just by focusing your attention on it through self-talk, you may learn it so fast. Just by even the point is, you have to understand at the beginning, like that it refers to our previous discussion about foolishness. So you have to understand that you don't know the topic, and then you have to learn like what exactly is it that you want to know. And you ask yourself, you should, like, it looks embarrassing in the beginning, so you just start talking and you can't formulate your ideas clearly, you can't understand what you're talking about even. But like, there are some moments when you just talking, and then you are lost, you don't know how to get further. But then you just watch it again, and oh, like, this was the point which I wanted to, like, to
So
develop. And
you kind of look like a fool at first. It's something that you have to develop. Like you
yeah,
start looking like a fool, and then you start getting a little bit better. Is
yeah,
that
most of the time, like, especially if you use a foreign language, most of the time. But this is exactly, recently I watched, I already mentioned this guy, Andrew Huberman. He's neuropsychologist, not neuroscientist, not psychologist. And he basically studies like neuroplasticity, brain functions. And this is a crucial experience for, like, neuroplasticity, like the ability of your brain to change its structure and connections between neurons. It looks as if it stops working after 25 years. So when you're 25 years old, approximately 26, 27, 24, your brain becomes rigid.
Oh
But
wow.
there, and that's why adults tend to learn way slower than children. But there are some conditions which, like, certain ways of behavior which you may do, and if you do it enough, your brain creates certain uh, hormones or neurotransmitters which actually make this neuroplasticity. So you may change your brain by exposing yourself to certain experience, and this feeling of frustration, awkwardness, being a fool, it's one of the conditions. So you just,
Wow, really?
yeah, it's
So
like,
it gives you more more plasticity in your
yeah,
brain.
it
Wow.
just creates a boost of plasticity. So if you understand, like, but most people, they usually they run away from that feeling, so they can't accept that, they feel foolish, and next time they don't go and continue. So they just, okay, I wouldn't do that at all. But if you continue, so if you understand that this is you have to create kind of subjective evaluation. So you have to understand that it may be not, it may look stupid, it may feel embarrassing, but you know what you're doing. So your goal is like developing your language, developing your understanding. And even if you look like a fool, it's very productive if you think in the long term. It's not you're practicing, it's like real experience. And like, when you learn to accept this feeling, and the whole idea is to know this molecule like dopamine,
Yeah.
dopamine. So you need to create this subjective, uh, kind of subjective reward, which you give yourself, like kind of mental dialogue with yourself, when you justify this feeling and say that it's good, that it makes sense. It's almost the
Well,
same as
and
physical.
it's
Yeah,
okay to look like a fool, like you told. I think that's one of the first things that you told me. I told you something about being a fool, and you told me, well, like anyone who wants to be a philosopher, you shouldn't really you shouldn't really worry about being a fool, because that's always part of the process, right? So I think it's good, that for a person to be willing to look like a fool, because you're learning in the process, right?
Yeah, and it also makes you like you don't want to look like a fool. And there's two
True.
ways. There,
True.
there, there's that's how neuroplasticity works. So there's two ways. The first way, you just don't do anything. You don't continue growing in this direction. So okay, I look like a fool. Therefore, not to look like a fool, I just wouldn't talk. I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't, I wouldn't go further. Or you may get further and try to fight with this feeling. So you may just try to learn something, try to learn to speak well, to be able to express your thoughts clearly, precisely, exactly like being able to formulate your ideas, articulate what you want to say. And it's a long process. It just
I like that. I like that.
it's
So
it's
yeah, so you have two choices, right? You have to either you stop doing it or you get good at it. So that those are the two choices that your brain is
yeah, yeah,
considering.
and your brain basically creates this. You hate it, right? And your brain, that's like neuroplasticity starts working. So you hate it, you don't want it, and your brain just changes itself to avoid this negative experience. But still, again, it's like it works when you understand that it's very like in languages. I guess it's like, well, at least in my experience, it took me a few years since I was able to feel good when I was doing self-talk. And first, I wouldn't say that I always feel bad
Was that with the Russian or with the English? Those
with
two.
the with English. So
So
mm,
what about with the even with the Russian? Did you go through the same process?
with the Russian, I noticed immediately lots of like not mistakes, but no filler words. I repeated all the time, which I didn't like, which I hated. Again,
Well, that's
then
happened to me. That happened to me when I first started doing videos on YouTube, which is not so long ago. I only started last year, like the end of
mhm,
last year, and I started doing videos. I might go back to doing that every once in a while, do because I like football a lot. So I started like a football channel.
mhm.
Those were my first videos. And man, I listened to myself talk and I felt so bad, I felt so embarrassed because I hated the way I sounded, I hated the way I looked. But I think mostly I felt embarrassed because I kept using like these words that were I was repeating the same words again and again. I think it was because I was nervous.
Mhm.
And like exactly like you're saying, like you repeat the same words or the same sounds like like
Mhm.
I like my first video. I still do it, but like my first video was basically me just saying uh and I felt like so embarrassed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this like exact feeling which you need to get better. So, but probably you need to create a goal again. In my case, there was word like so to speak. I remember it's like in Russian, it's так сказать. And the first video I repeated maybe 15, 20 times, like short video, 5 minutes, narrate like так сказать, так сказать, так сказать. And wow, that's so strange. I need to get rid of it. So it's the first impression after watching myself recording the video. I decided to work on my language, and it took me 2 months to get rid of this this fillers.
Yeah,
Basically,
I think it's something that you probably use in your normal life, but also it's increased by the fact that you're very nervous, and you're doing something that you're not comfortable, right? So you're bringing this out a lot more. Maybe like in your normal life you would use it, but when you're just speaking like that and you're nervous, then that really comes out all the time.
yeah, it's definitely it's accelerates when you just have new experience. But you know what I've noticed, like when I started doing it in my like recording videos, I remember no, I had different conversations with different people like throughout life, and I remember myself like in these conversations, and most of the time I didn't like too much what was going on. I didn't like what we were talking about, how I could formulate my ideas, express myself. But after I started practicing this exercise, like in few years, it's like I became like an excellent speaker. So whenever there's a conversation, I may just hold people's attention for hours, like talking without pauses, just being able to develop my ideas so clearly. And I was so excited by that. Then I it led to kind of a weird point where I couldn't speak with people at all. Since whenever I have a conversation, basically like I do all talking, like 90% of talking. Since when I start talking, I just may just go faster and further without, like, people can just, if I'm silent, people also silent. They can't say anything. But with English, it's it's kind of different. Probably it was one of the reasons why I decided to shift to English, since I didn't have anybody to communicate with in Russian. Like, I had, of course, lots of people to talk to, but it wasn't interesting for me, like, otherwise than just practicing developing my own ideas and talking about my stuff.
Well, I think it gives you a versatility that is certainly an advantage that you have. Now you can communicate with the Russian world, but you also can communicate with the English speaking world, which is, I mean, at this point, English speaking world is not just native English speakers. It's it's the YouTube, for example. So you're really, English is a global. I don't think there are any other truly global languages right now. It's because French. Yes, you have French all over the world, but it's just, you have these countries that speak French, right? But you don't. It's not like every country. It's not like the whole world, right? The same thing about Spanish. Portuguese, which is my native language. You have it across 7 or 8 countries in the world, but also it's just those countries alone. So it's Arabic, obviously. You have Arabic in about 20 countries, but it's all in the Middle East. English is it's different because you have the places that are the native speakers, like parts of Europe, the United Kingdom, Ireland. Then you have North America, and you have Australia and New Zealand, and
there's India also, like,
a couple
billion of people, like, in India, and all speak English as well.
They don't all speak English, though. I mean, some of them do, and some of them don't.
It's like 80% of India. I actually communicated with lots of Indian guys.
I have
various chats
here. Yeah, I have some Indian friends here. But in any case, you have those spots, right? India as well, South Africa.
Yeah.
But it's not just that, right? I mean, it's all the other countries as well. All over Europe. Good part of Latin America. Good part of Africa, Asia. So it's really almost every country, or the vast majority of country, people use this language to also communicate, and they have some understanding of it. Different degrees of understanding, but it goes from being fluent in English to understanding, right? So but there's a great degree of exposure, so you can communicate with people. It's probably what the equivalent of what
French was,
perhaps Latin.
18th century French was like the global language.
Yes,
lingua franca. Yeah, I think even in our lifetime, like in 20-30 years, all people will speak like English. Maybe it will become second language around the globe. Since on the internet, it's if you know English, you basically have all the information. And if you know just your local language, it's all science, like not all, but in Russia, for example, it's quite clear that I've watched lots of scientific lectures on YouTube before I started studying English, and most of them were just translations from English. So different courses, but they always cite, like, some of them weren't even available. If you don't understand English, you can't watch anything, because all terms or all studies were made like by Russian scientists. They were made in English language, since like the population which may understand and which may read these like these whatever, like, materials.
Yeah, that's
it's better to make it in English to get audience with 1 billion people than to write it in Russian and nobody is going to read it at all. And
right. I mean, particularly in some fields like science, right? I mean, English has really become the language because exactly because of that, because you can share it with people from all over the world. You can share it with the community, whereas in Russia, in Russian, you can only share it with people in Russia. Well, I mean, Russian is spoken is it's another global language, right? Because it's spoken in a bunch of different countries, but Russian. It's still, well, yeah. I mean, you have other.
Yeah, after Soviet Union, it's yes. Like it had a great reception, but
yes, like in the former Soviet Union space.
Yeah.
but
and
it's
also
still
Russian literature is quite popular. Like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy are familiar to all people.
yeah,
Not all,
yeah.
but many people know them.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But it's still like I was saying, like Russian is like Arabic or Portuguese or Spanish or French, right? That it's a pretty global language, but it's still not it still doesn't touch like the whole globe, right? Like English does these days because it's a second language to so many people. So it gives you that versatility, and it's learning a language also really like you're saying, it works the brain, it gives you this certain plasticity, just like traveling does, that you're increasing you're it's not just even about the knowledge, right? But you get certain different perspectives.
You expand your headspace.
Exactly, your headspace becomes bigger. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And people don't really know until they learn other languages or until they go to other places and travel extensively, right? Or live in a different place. That's really even better than traveling.
Yeah,
But
but you don't even like nowadays. You don't need to go anywhere. Just the internet. Like how much time? Again, this whole idea that we are pulled to by this media to the internet, like to spend as much time as we have on the internet, more and more time, and essentially the language which you use on the internet it may be any language, so you don't need to use your native language. If you choose to use like English or French or German or Chinese, you basically may learn too quickly a new language. And if you live in this, like, I guess in 10-15 years we're all gonna spend like more than half of our wakefulness just being on the internet, and knowing English basically, or studying language, not necessarily English, but any language. So when you study language, you basically understand better the part of the internet which this, I guess, even there's kind of fight and between languages, like what kind of language will dominate this cyberspace in the future. And
I mean, English has such a big head start that it's going to be hard to fight it off. I don't even like particularly like the idea that English is the world language, because I don't know. I'm not super partial to it, but
mhm.
I would actually rather have like something like French dominate like it used to be, like with the world, the language of diplomacy, of politics, because I think it's a little bit more neutral. I mean, even better would be Latin, but Latin at this point is a dead language. Some people are now proposing in the European Union, because the United Kingdom left. Some people are saying that Latin should be brought back and should be made into the common language of Europe. The problem with that is that yeah, I mean, it's a little bit too late, because we kind of lost it at this point. I think it's still doable as a Latin, and actually it's good. I would like to learn Latin, actually, Latin and ancient Greek, because I think I'm fascinated by this idea of studying the classics, which is something that is still done in a number of elite high schools, elite and preparation schools. My school in particular, we didn't do that, even though I studied humanities. But I would like to study ancient Greek and Latin, and I think there's still usefulness to studying those languages. I think it expands your mind, and it gives you an exposure to highest culture we have produced, which is the classical culture. However, as a language of communication, I think Latin, it's a little bit too late, because nobody really knows how to speak Latin these days, right? We can
No,
only read it.
I I disagree. I guess there are lots of communities, not lots of them, but there are certain communities on the internet where you may go and find people who speak Latin. In the same way as you may find people who speak Esperanto or any like
Yeah.
artificial language. They may be small, but do you really need a lot of people? I mean, if you have like 50 people speaking Latin,
Well, do you
you
do you think it would be feasible to bring back Latin and to make it a common language? Do you think
oh,
it's
but it yeah, as I said, it exists all now, but it's just less popular than English, for example, or Russian. But still, there are small communities. And by the way, I think, like in my uh, opinion, you may basically learn to think in Latin if you really want to use
well,
this language.
I want to learn at some point. I want to learn. I just don't know if I'll be able to speak it since people don't speak it, right?
But you don't need to speak it with people. You just may use it for thoughts, for
No,
thinking.
no, I know. I understand that, but what I'm saying is like
Self.
I'm talking about like what I was saying before as a common language, right? As a
Uh-huh.
second common, because English is so widespread, even in Europe. Because I looked at the percentages, about 40%, I think, of people speak it to some degree in Europe.
I guess it's kind of more elitist language. And once again, so if you need to speak Latin, there are people who speak Latin. You may always find them. And studying Latin, well, I tried. I guess we talked about it the first time when we had a conversation about Latin. I told you how I memorized this
Oh,
ecclesiastic.
sure.
Yeah, and I didn't try to speak. I didn't try to learn to think in Latin, but I just learned some common expressions. Like there are lots of proverbs, and I tried to read some ancient texts, but it was all like, as you said, just mental exercise to get yourself familiar with some ancient ideas in original. But I think it's possible even now, like
Okay. Well, good to
to,
know. Yeah, this is something
to
I'm still like thinking of this to me it's important. I think it's an important conversation because especially in the European context. And I think even Russia, in my opinion, I think I would like to see Russia be a part of Europe again, be a part of the European Union, of the European project. I think
mhm.
that would be very important for Europe at some point. And I think the United Kingdom will probably come back. I think that was kind of like a weird situation that.
Well, there are lots of talks about like complete globalization, like in terms of the whole globe is going to be united under some, like, all national states will collapse. We'll have like some global,
Well,
brave new world for for a certain period of time, and then again, it's like the whole idea that it wouldn't stay long. Maybe it'll stay like 5, 10, 15 years, and then it's collapsed, and there will be small tribes, and the whole history starts from almost from the beginning, kind of new feudal era,
well,
something
I
like
think
that.
I've always thought, and I think that's for me that's really the central tenet of my political thinking. I think is I believe that there should be more integration between the countries. I think the European project is very important, and I think even on a global level, it's crucial that in the 21st century we unite under a world government. And that means not just a centralized world government, but I think a sort of federation of countries.
Mhm.
And it should be something gradual, obviously, but more. We need to think more in international terms. I think that is the only way that we're really just going to make it. Because at some point it's going to become inevitable. Because we have atomic weapons now. We're going to have a lot more atomic weapons in
In
a
the
100 years
future,
from now,
sure, yeah.
like weapons of mass destruction. It's not just going to be atomic weapons, and also a lot of the challenges that we face now, like our environmental challenges. I think they're going to get much worse. Like in 100 years from now, we're going to be talking about something that is much worse than we're talking about today. So you can't really face a lot of those challenges with our current system. I think it's pretty inadequate.
Well, I think
So
artificial general intelligence will solve this problem. It's it's definitely like not a issue for the individual human being or even for like society. So it's gonna be solved on the next level. And I guess the first thing which needs to be done is just global language. And if English will manage to become a global language, we'll probably be united or integrated in one community. Like or if Elon Musk succeed with his project and we'll create like Mars life on Mars. There may be some
uh,
kind of
I mean, we
global.
can't we can't
Glo-
try to do like I
no,
think
I mean it may help like people who live on Earth just unite against Martians, and or Martians will create a community and then conquer Earth, and something like that. I don't know, but it
well
looks Yeah, it looks like language is the central problem since we can't unite unless we have a common language. And obviously, no national state will agree to use to replace its language with English or with any other languages. So first we need to solve the problem how to how to create one language which everybody on this political higher level will agree to use, and not just use, to to adapt for for well, it's hard to explain.
No, but I think that's actually a very interesting point. The point of language as unity or division. And I think you're right. I think part of our problem in terms of unity and division is associated with language. For example, the Catalan language, for example, as it becomes stronger, in Catalonia, they speak a different language. They don't speak Spanish. Well, they speak some Spanish, but they consider Catalan to be their language. And that has fueled a great degree of nationalism, or the idea that they want to be their own country, their own nation. And I don't agree or disagree with that, but it's a fairly common thing, right? When you have one language, we often associate the idea of having your own language with the idea of having your own nation.
Yeah, and it's a part of your identity, right? Which you get almost from the beginning of when you start life, you just learn language, and it's like your mother language or your native language. But no, in my view, again, it seems as I got rid of these, I call them superstitions. So basically, there's no any native language. You may use any language when you are mature enough to understand that it's just languages, and they're basically, it's even harder since I think that there's just one language. So all this, there's common idea that all languages are created by Indo-European family of languages, or another family like Chinese languages. But in my view, I know, have you heard about Chomsky universal grammar? Noam Chomsky.
No, I have not.
It's in 50s, in 1950s, he basically proposed some, even it was called linguistic revolution.
I didn't know that. No, tell me a little bit about tell me a little bit about that. I think it's
universal grammar is basically that we have certain mechanisms from birth, and all languages, they're kind of it's my vague understanding, but I just expressed how I perceive it. So the whole idea, there's just one language. There's no English, Russian, French, German, just words. But the structure itself, it's in every language, it's kind of similar. So and you basically may think about the different languages as dialects of one particular language. And when you understand that, you are no longer limited by your perception that this one language, this another language, and people who speak different language, they are foreigners, and it's so again, hard to convey it in a short sentence. But the whole idea, language it's universally, it's the same thing, and we are equipped with it from the very from the beginning. Although we if you start just learning one language at the age of 12 or 13, you basically, it's hard to learn another language, because your math and your articulation, it's not even at the age of 13. It's early, it's at 3 or 4. So you basically, if you are born anywhere, in any place, you may learn any language, and you may use phonemes and sounds which are universal. But then when you learn one language, you're
I understand, yes.
So you can
use your mouth, the way you formulate words.
Yeah, this it's not
conditioned.
It's not only about your articulation, it's also about your brain. So there's some part of your brain which is responsible for language, and it adjusts to one particular language. And after age of 5, 6, if you start studying another language, you may study it, but you will not sound like a native. So it will be impossible to achieve native native pronunciation, since
Right.
mechanism. Yeah, maybe it's possible if you just you forget the sound, like not forget, but again, imagine that there's 100 sounds, or 500 sounds universally,
Yeah,
and
it's
every
even if it's not impossible, I mean, it's very, very, very difficult.
yeah,
Right?
it's all
Let's
yeah,
put
it's
it that
almost
way.
impossible. There's like 500 sounds, and each language have just 50 sounds. And when you are till the age of 3 or 4, you may basically learn all these sounds. But after that, your brain is focused on only particular set of sounds, and you can't
Yeah.
learn new, like it's not sounds. It's not phonemes or morphemes.
Yeah,
Just the
no,
way how.
and look, I understand it. Like for me, it's really a personal thing because for my life circumstances, I lived in a number of different places and I learned different languages. But it's gotten harder and harder, for me to learn other languages. Portuguese, my first language, then English, my second one. I was still fairly young, and then Spanish, and then Italian, and then French. By the time I was learning French, I was way into my 20s, my mid 20s. So it was already pretty hard. It was already pretty hard, and I still don't speak French very well. Even though I've lived there and I spent some time trying to. But the older you get, the harder it gets for you to fully simulate that language. And I think it's like you're saying, your brain is not as elastic. The way your mouth works is already preconditioned, so
Yeah, but
certainly gets harder.
besides pronunciation, you still may learn to use this language to write, to understand, at least to understand it. So basically, to understand any language is quite possible if you just dedicate enough time, and you have certain purpose which so you have motivation to do that. And I want to get back to this universal language, say a few more words about like this
Absolutely.
universal language. So recently I was looking for certain words in Latin. I needed like some verbs related to the idea of control, and not just control, like govern, control. What was there? Create, manage. Yeah, manage. So I was looking for these verbs, and I realized that like most of them are already like in Russian, or I have certain words which derivative from these Latin verbs, and I couldn't find any verb for my purpose, since all of them were already adopted either by English or by Russian. Like they were describing different activities or certain some social roles. Like for example, what was the word? Rector. Do you know the word rector?
Rector? No, I don't think so.
It's like
So you were trying to find like a. I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow that. So you were trying to find like a new verb? Is that what
I was looking for a verb in Latin, which like manage, control, govern. So I want to create basically a word in English, but all these verbs were already adopted in English or in the Russian language.
Okay.
And I couldn't find a verb to like for my purpose. And this idea about universe, like it's the same, like one and the same language. You basically just learn new words, and you see and you understand way better the language when you know like roots of every word.
Yeah.
And
that's why it also, the other side of the coin, yes, the older you get, it becomes harder to learn a language, but it's also true that the more languages you know, the easier it gets to some extent to learn a language, because you can use things from the other languages, especially if you understand like roots of things, so you can understand the language easier, right? Because you know the processes that go into.
Yeah, and the whole idea, like this idea with verbs. So basically, like we have lots of verbs which basically describe the same action, and it looks like for me, when I was like looking for these verbs, I just imagine like, how could it how did it evolve? Like how languages spread from one another? And there was this idea that, let's suppose there was a community of people who were speaking one language,
Yeah.
like 10,000 years ago. For the sake of argument, we wouldn't identify it clearly, but then
Mhm.
some people decided
Yeah.
create their own community, let's say, and they adopted some. No, they basically took the language which they already had, and they started adding some new verbs or interpreting the same language in a different way. So you may just take one word and you may create a new meaning and apply it to this word, and then it's like
Right.
it grows. Like you basically use the same verbs or words for describing different processes, and then it's like this Babylonian what Babel Tower,
Yeah.
Babel,
Babel Tower.
yeah, Babel Tower.
Babel
When you
Tower. Yeah.
know,
Tower of Babel.
yeah, Babel Tower. Well, when you know like lots of languages, but it
Yeah.
looks as if they just it's kind of they are mixed up in your head, and you basically can't
Right.
understand anymore anything.
Yeah. The Tower of Babel. Yeah. There's a movie, right? Babel, or Babel.
No, I haven't watched.
Yeah, it's like with Brad Pitt, I think, or something like that. I have watched it, but it was a while ago, a long time ago. So I don't remember much. But yeah, and it's not really about language. It's just about this idea that people kind of like don't understand each other.
Mhm. Yeah, understanding is like also, every word which I say, basically, you may attach a slightly different meaning to it. And it seems that we may have a conversation, we may understand each other, but how exactly you understand what I'm saying and how I understand what you're saying, it's so different in our personal experience. So let's suppose that, for example, the word fear, right? You may heard this word and you may attach certain meaning to this word. And the word fear, it's like for everybody, it's going to be different word. So you will have different emotions when you hear this word. You will have different, ideas associated with this word. And it looks as for most words, we have these different types of experience. And the more we communicate, the better we understand each other. But
Mhm.
still, there's a huge gap between our understanding. So we can't fully understand each other, even if we have almost the same experience. Exactly because of these like differences in perception and different contexts through which we learn languages.
True. Yeah. No, it seems. I think this idea of language. I've become like increasingly interested in. Before, I've always been interested in language, but now I'm interested in just the science of language. Linguistic,
Mhm,
or
mhm,
I should say, it's not even the science of language. It's more the history of language. I've
mhm.
watched Tolkien recently, which made me even more interested in this, which is a movie about. I'm sure you're familiar with the Lord of the
Yeah,
Rings,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I watched the movie. I haven't read the book, but I watched the movie.
Yeah, so you are fairly familiar with it. And Tolkien, I don't know if you know, it's the name of the writer, right?
Hmm.
So he's a
Yeah.
famous writer in the English speaking world because, well, he really hasn't written much outside of the Lord of the Rings, but that's such an influential work. And
Yeah, he was one of the first who proposed this, creating new like fancy new genre of literature.
yes,
I
yes.
read I read Thomas Hardy. He was his predecessor. I guess this was the first guy who created this imaginary world and with connections. I read few of his books, but
Really?
anyway.
Okay. I'm not even familiar just with the name, but I haven't read anything by him at all. What did he write, Thomas Hardy?
Well, I read Jude the Obscure, and it's kind of tragedy, but
Yeah.
there's like, well, long story. I actually found this book after I watched the series. What was the series? Westworld. Have you watched
Westworld,
Westworld?
yeah, that's a great show, isn't it?
So
That's a great show.
I definitely agree, but not about the whole show. Like the third season, I haven't managed to even watching it. It was like I didn't like the third season was just terrible. The second was uh
Well, I haven't seen the whole season. Only seen the first episode, and I didn't like it, so I didn't watch it. The
Yeah, I
first,
also
but
didn't see
I
the whole
think the third
season.
season,
I also
yeah,
didn't
it's
see
so
the
different than the rest.
yeah
You know, but the first season and the
the
second
first season
were
just so,
very
so
good.
yeah. And in the second season, at the end of second season, if you remember, this man in black, when his wife committed suicide, there was a
Yes.
moment when on the bookshelf she put his card in a book, and in these
Uh-huh.
books, if you pause, you may read titles of the book, and one of the book was Jude the Obscure, and I
Okay.
just found,
Well,
yeah,
that
I
and
found this
that's why
book,
you
and then
decided to read the book.
yeah, and then I well, I just another book was The Slaughterhouse Number 5 by Kurt Vonnegut, and
Mhm.
I later also read this book as well. But in our library, I have a limited amount of books in library, and when I discovered Thomas Hardy Jude the Obscure after watching this episode in the TV show, I decided, oh, I'm gonna read it. So it was it
That's
wasn't a big
great.
book, like
Is it
400
good?
pages. Well, I read it in a few days, like 400 pages, very fast, and it definitely made a huge impression on me.
Oh wow.
But but other is books. I after that I took almost all its books, and I got in library, took 6 or 7 books. I decided to read all of them, but I couldn't manage to read more than few more books. So I've read Mayor of Casterbridge, and I started reading Woodlanders, and I stopped since it was kind of, I got bored.
You got bored. Yeah, I mean, it's understandable.
You
But
started talking about
Yeah,
Tolkien, and I
Tolkien.
I
Yeah.
just
So my
interrupted.
point was that there, and I would definitely recommend to you if you can watch this movie at some point. It's just called Tolkien, and it's the story of his
Mhm.
life.
Is it a documentary?
No, it's a drama. It's a drama.
Oh,
It's
okay.
with a fairly famous young English actor right now. It's his name is, I think, Nicholas Hoult. I think so. He's in a
Mhm.
he used to be like a teen
So it's
actor.
like an autobiography, just made.
Yeah, it's a biography of Tolkien, but
Mhm.
it's what's interesting about the book. Sorry, about the movie
Mhm.
is that it talks quite a bit about linguistics, and that's what I wasn't expecting. Um, and that's what I found interesting. The whole reason why Tolkien created the universe that he created was because and the books that he wrote was really because of linguistics, because he was interested in giving meaning. He was much more interested in language than he was in literature.
Mhm.
Um, and that was in fact his training. It was in linguistics. He was interested in creating languages, creating new sounds, creating new forms of communication, which is a very interesting concept in itself. But what is even more interesting is that he understood that language is really a product of history, right? In some sense, like it evolves from something. Like language by itself doesn't really mean much. You know, it needs to come from a certain history, a certain shared experience. So that's why he started to develop these tales about the words that he was creating, because he
Mhm.
wanted to give them weight. He wanted to create a language, but he wanted the language to
Yeah,
mean something. And he created
history
a
context.
world to he
Mhm.
created a fake history to explain, you know, why these words meant what they meant, which
Mhm.
is kind of like it's an insane level of nerdiness, but you know, this was important to him. But and it's true. I mean, and this applies very much so to real life, you know, to real language. Real language is really an expression of shared history, you know, and that's why language evolves, you know, and it's really a historical process. It's
Yeah.
really a process.
Get back to this guy Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
Like his idea also, like he talks more. No, there's a like an argument between linguists whether language is evolved around communication or it's evolved around thinking. And basically, this guy Noam Chomsky is one of the people who argues that it's basically the function of language is thinking. It's not about communication. Since most of the time we think, like when we communicate only like 10, 15, 20% of the time, but most of the time we think in language. And the primary function is communication. Now, this guy, Steven Pinker, it's like it's a middle ground. So he says like 50% thinking, 50% communication. We don't know. It's like trying to mediate between the opposite sides. And there are some other linguists, like I guess the name of the guy was Jackendorf, Ray Jackendorf. He actually was a student of Chomsky, and he proposed that communication is the primary function. So there's lots of arguments whether like history, experience, or just thinking.
Right. Yeah, and that's a very interesting way to put things. I hadn't thought about it in that from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, thinking is certainly one language, one function of language. Yes.
Yeah, but most of the time, again, most of the time you think, you use language for like on an individual level. Of course, it's impossible to develop your language without the community, right? So you are born and you have to learn like words from somebody else. You have to read books or you have to communicate with people. But basically, when you are already know certain words, or at least you know the scheme, like this, basic grammar, you basically may create unlimited unlimited world, like the whole universe, just giving meaning to what you know, describing things just in your own way, creating some imaginary stories, putting all this together. Just this whole idea with experience. Yeah, definitely language evolved around experience. But what is, like, in my view, history, it's also kind of tricky concept. You may also say whether it's absolute or relevant. We don't actually know whether history, like what we call history, it's like the one thing which is unquestionable, or it's always relevant. I mean, if we just think about the past, like imagine that we have a conversation, like long conversation, like 10 hours, and each of us just talking about the past, like what you know happened in 20th century, in 19th century, 18th century, 17th century. So each of us has different ideas about past, different figures from the past. Like philosophers will tell you, like Plato, Aristotle, Kant, whoever. Some other people will talk about like warriors, like Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Hitler, Caesar, like literature, Shakespeare, poetry, Goethe, Voltaire, whoever. And it's always like, it seems like you create the past history, and it's always there's no objective history. That's what's so tricky. And when you start investigating further and further, you understand that it's unlimited, and it's kind of you don't know exactly what is real in the past. You may agree on something that happens 100 years ago. You may agree on something that happens 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Some facts, but interpretation of these facts, like now, let's talk about Nazi Germany and World War II. Mm-hmm. Now we interpret it in a way that it's a negative event, right? So Hitler is the most terrible person, like the modern villain, which history never seen before. But if we imagine like time in like 2,000 years from now, there are probably different interpretations. As Alexander, what's the difference between Hitler and Napoleon, or Napoleon and Alexander the Great?
Right. I think the difference is that
there is a difference, of course. It's like in the amount of people killed, and
well, not only that. I think Hitler in particular, I think he I think one of the reasons is that it's so much more recent. Hitler to us is
exactly.
very, very close. So we interpret things that are close in a much more sentimental way. This is not about Hitler. I'm making this observation as a general rule. Like the closer something in history, the closer something is to us in history, the more emotion goes towards it. Because I mean, if we're talking about something that happened 5 years ago, we look at it from a very partial perspective usually, it's just natural, right? So, but something that happened 5,000 years ago, it becomes a matter of really academic debate, because there's no personal investment. So World War II is just much closer than Napoleon, and certainly
Mhm.
much closer to Caesar or Alexander. So that in itself, that already creates a considerable. I mean, there are people now that fought in World War II, so it's something that is very present.
Yeah, but interpretation again, it's like it's always different
It's an
interpretation.
interpretation. Yeah. And then
That's
you
what's
have
striking.
other issues like I mean, the Hitler was from a moral perspective. I mean, the whole vision of the world espoused by National Socialism. I mean, it's and again, it's a matter of interpretation, right? But I think, fortunately, in my perspective, we are not partial to National Socialism. In fact, we
Mhm.
are very opposed to the ideals of National Socialism, at, as it was created really by Hitler. So, or popularized by Hitler. So I think there is a difference there. Whereas, when you look at Alexander, he was more a conqueror, a conqueror king, which was actually, if you
There,
look at history,
there was no media at that time. I mean, there was media, but it wasn't popular.
well,
People couldn't read. You
he was.
couldn't. Yeah, you
Yeah, I
couldn't.
mean the ideals behind it, like I can get behind the ideals of Alexander the Great. In fact, I mean he's probably my favorite historical figure, but
Mhm.
the ideals behind Hitler were very very different. So I think there are differences there, but of course they were all conquerors in their own way.
Genghis
Uh,
Khan, this guy,
yeah,
Genghis Khan. But
and look,
in
if
reference to,
Khan was if Genghis Khan was a little bit closer to us, maybe we would compare him to Hitler, because he
yes,
was he
they
was
said
also
this.
not a very nice guy. I mean, he was a pretty destructive fellow. So
Yeah, it's like half of Russians are like still bear his genes, I guess.
yes, I
uh,
mean it
this
wasn't.
whole idea with interpretation of history, it's you look, for example, Shakespeare. It, like we all know something about Shakespeare, but imagine that there are people who don't know English at all, like who live
Yeah,
in some small countries or small tribes, and they never heard of Shakespeare. And the question is, like, does Shakespeare exist for these people? It's like their history is too different. They don't know about certain, like especially some tribes which are still maybe found in some Latin America or Australia or different countries. So it's like the history for them and history for us, it's a totally different, like, uh thing.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of knowledge as well, because we don't know much of history, right? So our history is really the things that we know that we can put together, but there's so much that we don't know, right? So of course, it's a narrative that we create with the facts that we do know, which are limited,
Yeah, no,
which are
just an
limited.
idea just spring to mind right now about this
Something that drives me crazy because I'm obsessed.
you're
Yeah.
lagging, you're lagging a little bit.
Oh,
You're
okay. Yeah,
still
it's just
lagging.
the problem with my internet. It's the problem. Just go ahead. You can talk. I can
Yeah,
hear you.
yeah.
Just
Now it's
I have
better. So this idea with
yeah,
talking,
but you're
which you said, just you know imagine that he just tried to escape from the real history. He tried to create his own history and make sense, as you said, that he was interested in linguistic and making like new words, new conceptions. And for him, basically, like, what's the matter if I just create my own history and describe it? How is that gonna grow? And like
well,
you attach your,
he was an odd person, right? Because he was not very interested in real language. He was more interested in creating his own language, and then he wasn't
yeah, yeah,
interested in real history. He was more interested in creating
creating
his
his
own.
own history. But that's exactly what we are all doing. It's the same language as I mentioned, this universal language. Like in my understanding, there's also like kind of counter. Okay, I'll explain in, again, simple words. So every language, it's your personal language. So you don't learn language, you create it basically for yourself. So if you learn English, like you create connections in your brain which you use to describe certain emotions, certain experience, certain knowledge. And it's never the same language. Basically, you can put at something and say, this is language. It's always created by some person. So every dialogue, every book, it's written by some person. We may from the same position, we may consider like universal language. It's like absolute language. It's the thing that never existed at all. So there's only one form of language, and it's personal language, and you create it all the time.
Okay. Yeah.
And it means at this level, it means that there's no one English. There's no 5 dialects of English. There's as many Englishes as many there are people around the world who speak English. And
that's and you might be right about that. It's just that we cannot think about it on those terms, or we'd go crazy, a billion types of English, it's like
billion languages, right? But some of their there's certainly like, if we take Tolkien and assume that he never published his books and never like share his experience with somebody else, he had his own personal language. And then we may say, like, let's suppose Tolkien created his own society, like somewhere, some island, and just told this society, this is the real history, this is what's going on. And basically the whole community will view like his, like it's going to be like people who take his language as kind of universal language, share common experience, and for them it's going to be a real thing. And then they'll speak about it, and they have kind of one dialect of English, and then different people create their different stories, right? So in English, like the whole history, we imagine that history. It's like, what is history? We identify certain events, we connect them, and we decide to give them certain meaning and say, like, this is true, this is not true, this is what happened, this is what didn't happen. And then we create some common narrative which we may use to communicate with each other. But it's like, it looks like all of this is kind of just a fiction. So you may create any narrative for yourself and put this narrative and say, this is true, this is what's actually happened, this is how it was going on. Take all different facts and just I'm working on my personal history, and I guess why I'm so excited about these ideas of creating history, this writing down everything what's going on for 12 years, like first in Russian, then in English. It makes my perspective of my view of reality certainly distorted from like general view, and you look at your life and you just see single points, like, okay, like when I was 20 this happened, when I was 25 this happened. But in my experience, basically, if you ask me what happened like 2014 in June, I'll tell you like the whole story about if you ask me about like 2000, even like from the beginning, from 2008, I basically revise this story which I write every time. So every year I reread it. I try to understand it with new experience. I try to reinterpret the experience which I had before, and it accumulates. So now it's like 12 years of history in several thousands pages, and I read it like once a year to understand better what was going on with new experience. It's always fresh, it's always new. So I like live my life like many different times. So it's like every and it always grows, and it's so exciting. Like in terms of it doesn't take again to make it. It takes just 30 minutes a day. You basically write down one page of what you are doing, or it may be self-talk. You just record 20, 30, 50 minutes of just your stream of consciousness. But then when you interpret it in the long run, it looks totally different, and you may see things which you couldn't see when you were actually creating it, when you were writing, or when you were talking. New experience. So fascinating.
That's really fascinating, man. I'm gonna think about that the whole day. Vladimir, let's end this. It was a fantastic conversation, but all good things must come to an end.
Yeah, sure.
And
subscribe to our channel, guys.
I stop recording, do you want
I want
to subscribe to our channel, please. Vladimir's channel as well, and I have my personal channel as well, even though I don't really do much with it. I really do much more for this one. But yeah, subscribe if you guys can. And
I
thanks
also
for
have like
listening. Bye bye.
if you
Go ahead. Go ahead. We're still recording. So if you want to say
or
something.
I also have a channel. It's called Ego English. Ego, like ego, this ego in like the self, Ego English. And there are conversations with I made the podcast. They're just there are no videos, just audio recordings, like talks with my participants of my club, and they're basically about language. I ask for how they learn language, and
Cool.
they're most of them 30 50 minutes long. So if you have some interest in there, you may get this channel.
Yeah, if you guys have any interest in that, try to find that and subscribe to it. Well, thank you.
All right, so thank you.